Previously, Frey narrowly avoided death by using a system shield item to block a fatal blow from the fierce and stunning Irina. Now, battered and drained, he's being escorted back to his room by his ever-dutiful butler, who is less than amused by him. Later that night, as their carriage stopped in front of the student dormitory, Kania, the butler, turned to her young master. "Young master, we've arrived," she said softly. The protagonist, half asleep, lazily waved her away with his hand. "You can go now." Kania bowed but didn't leave. Straightening up, she looked him in the eye and said, "I will also be staying here from today onward." The protagonist bolted upright on his bed, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What? You're joking, right?" Her expression remained unreadable. "The Duke has instructed me to keep an eye on you, young master. Should you attempt to dismiss me, the Duke has also ensured you'll be expelled." His eyes widened in disbelief. He stared at her, dumbfounded, as the weight of her words settled in. He barely registered her setting up a neat bed on the floor before finally processing what she'd said. Turning inward, he opened the system screen to make sense of the situation. 3 potential game-over conditions appeared before him: expulsion or inability to attend the academy without a justifiable reason, death of any main heroine, death of the protagonist in any scenario outside the final battle. He glanced at Kania as she tucked herself into bed. She gave him a curt "good night, young master," before closing her eyes. Frowning deeply, the protagonist lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. "Protect my life, my classmates, and manage all this nonsense? This is absurd. This game is impossible." But he sighed, knowing that complaints wouldn't change his situation. The next morning, the soft chirping of birds filled the room as sunlight spilled in through the windows. Kania stood beside her young master's bed, bowing slightly. "Young master, you'll be late if you don't wake up soon," she said in a neutral tone. He groaned and rolled over, attempting to swat her away. "Like I care. I'm sleeping more," he muttered, still drained from the previous night's revelations. Unfazed, Kania turned and walked toward the door. "Then I'll leave first," she said sharply, reaching for the handle. Hearing her words, he bolted upright. "Wait, why are you deciding that on your own?" he called after her. Before she could respond, he doubled over, coughing violently. Cough, cough. The sound grew harsher, wet and ragged, until blood spilled from his mouth, staining the sheets. "Damn it," he thought, panic rising in his chest. "Did I give too much of my life force to her yesterday?" Kania turned back, her eyes narrowing slightly as she spoke. "Are you all right, young masters?" Her tone was indifferent, though a faint note of concern lingered. "It's nothing," he rasped, wiping his mouth. "Don't mind it. By the way, when did I ever say you could go ahead of me?" He pointed at her, his voice sharp with frustration. Snatching a fountain pen from her shirt pocket, he held it up. "You're just like this pen. Do you think it can move on its own? If you got a problem, leave. I'll just take your sister as my mistress instead." With that, he flung the pen, sending it clattering across the room. Kania froze, her body trembling. Tears welled in her eyes, her flushed cheeks streaked with sorrow. I apologize," she stammered, her voice breaking. "At the very least, please spare my sister." Before she could finish, he leaned in close, his voice mocking. "Are you crying?" he sneered. "It's about your precious little sister, after all. If you understand, don't get any more strange ideas." He patted her shoulder roughly, almost condescendingly. "Know your place, and everything will be fine," he added as he walked past her. The system chimed in his mind. Ding. False evil points +10. Threatening someone's family is going too far. Behind him, Kania knelt to pick up the pen. As her fingers closed around it, a memory flashed through her mind, her younger sister handing her the pen, smiling brightly. "Here you go. Think of this pen as me, and treasure it, okay?" The memory brought a faint blush to Kania's face. She clutched the pen tightly, holding on to the happiness of that moment. As she turned back to the bed to straighten up, her eyes widened at the sight of a bloody handprint on the sheets. Her thoughts raced. Did the young master have some kind of chronic illness in the past? She frowned, trying to recall any similar incidents, but came up blank. The morning light shone through the window as she stared at the crimson stain, her concern growing despite herself. Evening classes begin. Later that evening, the students gathered in their assigned seats, sitting upright and attentive. A strikingly beautiful teacher with flowing, lustrous hair stood at the front of the classroom. She introduced herself in a commanding voice. "I am Isekai Bywaker," she said, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room. "I will be your instructor for the first year." Just as she began her introduction, the door creaked open, and the protagonist entered alongside his butler, both late. Iselet's eyes narrowed. "You too. You're late." Her voice boomed, reverberating through the room. "I'm deducting 10 points as a penalty." The protagonist clicked his tongue, muttering under his breath to Kania, "Seriously, this is your fault for dawdling." Before he could take his seat, a voice from across the room rang out, catching everyone's attention. "You, why are you here?" It was Irina, the red-haired mage from the night before. Her outburst left the class murmuring in confusion. The protagonist froze momentarily, his teeth gritting and his eyes wide. "No comment," he muttered, quickly turning away and sliding into his seat. Iselet resumed her lesson, her tone sharp. "Enough interruptions. Let's continue." Meanwhile, Irina glared daggers at him, her mind racing. How is he alive? My magic was flawless. Could he be one of the Demon King's lackeys all along? She bit her nails, frustration and confusion clear on her face. "Please refrain from private conversations," Iselet snapped, her chalk scraping against the board. The protagonist slouched in his seat, his expression bored. "Why do we even have classes on the first day?" he muttered, ignoring the cold, piercing stare he felt from the silver-haired priestess, Frey, seated nearby. As the class concluded, Iselet announced, "That's the end of our first lesson. We'll move outside for combat training next." Before the protagonist could leave, a hand tapped him on the shoulder. He turned to find Frey smiling at him. "Frey-sama," she said sweetly. He frowned, wary. "Why is she talking to me?" "I'd like to offer you my blessings," she continued. "If you don't mind sparing a moment, preferably somewhere private." His instincts screamed at him. "Frey? What is she plotting?" The system chimed in his head. "Warning. False feelings intuition activated. You sense strong killing intent nearby." The protagonist smirked internally. "A bit too obvious, aren't we?" Looking her in the eye, he said flatly, "I decline." Her face fell, clearly not expecting this response. "But my blessings can't be bought with money," she stammered, trying to recover. "Like I said," he replied, turning away, "I don't need it." Flicking her off dismissively, he walked out, leaving her stunned. Frey shrieked in disbelief, tears welling up in her eyes. Watching her sob quietly, the protagonist sighed. Being too pure is its own curse. She's just going to end up being used by the church again. Combat training. Out in the training yard, Iselet stood before the students, her sword glinting in the fading sunlight. "Order everyone," she barked. "Our second lesson is combat training. Line up." As the students assembled in neat rows, Iselet stabbed her sword into the ground. "One by one, step forward. You'll duel me." The first student approached hesitantly, gripping his sword tightly. Before he could even raise it, Iselet blurred forward. With a single precise strike, she knocked his weapon out of his hand, sending it clattering to the ground. "Pathetic," she remarked coldly. Next, one by one, students faced her, and one by one, they were swiftly defeated. A mage tried to cast Fireball, but Iselet dodged effortlessly and taunted, "That looks more like a sparkler than a spell." The protagonist watched from the sidelines, sitting beside Kania. He smirked faintly. "Man, I can still feel her killing intent," he muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "Next," Iselet called, her voice sharp. Kania stood, her eyes narrowing as she stepped forward. "Oh, it's her turn," the protagonist said, leaning back lazily. Iselet sized Kania up. "Ready?" "Yes," Kania replied calmly, magic beginning to swirl faintly around her. Iselet launched herself forward with the same speed and precision as before. But Kania raised her hand, gathering the wind into a concentrated barrier. Iselet's sword struck the barrier with a resounding clang, the force reverberating through the air. Without missing a beat, Kania countered, creating another shield of wind to deflect Isolet's follow-up strikes. Their battle became a blur of magic and swordplay, each exchange growing fiercer. From the sidelines, the protagonist watched, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Kania," he muttered. Unbeknownst to her, he was secretly channeling his life force into her from afar, boosting her endurance. But the strain on him was beginning to show. "How long are you planning to keep this up?" he groaned, clutching his chest. The fight continued unabated, both combatants locked in an intense struggle. The protagonist could feel his energy draining rapidly. "This is too much. I have to stop her before I collapse." Isolet, the teacher, crossed her arms and smirked at Kania, the protagonist's butler. "You lasted much longer than I expected. Let's see how far you can really go." Before the teacher could press further, Kania canceled the swirling magic in her hands. She raised them into the air, signaling her surrender. "I'll stop here," she said calmly. Isolet raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Kania bowed slightly in respect. "I was born with unstable mana. If I push too far, it could go berserk." The teacher's stern expression softened slightly. "So that's why you moved so cautiously. How unfortunate. You have the potential to become a powerful mage." As Isolet stepped back to prepare for the next duel, the protagonist sighed in relief, sweat dripping from his face. "Thank God. I thought I was going to pass out from all the life force I was transferring to her." The next student was Irina, the red-haired mage. She approached the teacher confidently, but was swiftly defeated with a single move. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. "This one's not even worth mentioning," Isolet said, shaking her head. "Someone take her to the nurse's office." A black-haired girl rushed to Irina's side, shouting, "Irina, are you all right?" But Irina had already fainted, drooling as exhaustion overtook her. When it was Frolosh's turn, the silver-haired priestess, she hesitated. "Can I skip my turn?" she asked. Isolet frowned. "Why?" Frolosh lowered her gaze. "It feels wrong to use my powers against you." Isolet's smirk returned. "Skipping will not reflect well on you." "I understand," Frolosh said with a nod, stepping back into the crowd. Isolet turned her gaze to the protagonist. Now, for the last match of the day, all eyes shifted to him. The students murmured in anticipation, wondering how the duel would unfold. The protagonist walked forward with a smirk, adjusting the pendant on his collar. It was shaped like a cartoonish skull and emitted faint pink lightning sparks. "This is such a tedious thing," he said to Isolet. "Tell me, is it fun playing the passionate teacher?" Isolet's eyes narrowed. "And you? Is it fun pretending to be a noble? Come at me. I'll take this chance to fix that rotten character of yours." The protagonist dashed forward, his blade clashing against Isolet's with unexpected force. Isolet gritted her teeth, clearly caught off guard. "Looks like this pendant was worth every coin," the protagonist thought, smirking. The pendant, an artifact he had acquired from the black market, temporarily boosted his strength. "You're surprised by just this much?" he taunted, unleashing a powerful slash. The force of the attack blew Isolet back, her boots skidding against the dirt. Isolet retaliated with swift, precise strikes, but the protagonist infused his sword with aura, sending dual energy waves her way. Isolet narrowly dodged, wincing as one attack grazed her. The students gasped. "Unbelievable. He's pushing the teacher this hard." As the fight raged, the protagonist delivered a final blow, disarming Isolet. Her sword clattered to the ground, and the duel ended in his favor. Before anyone could react, Frolosh shouted, "That pendant! It's radiating demonic energy. She really is a snitch." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the protagonist, as Frolosh approached with a smug expression. "What's this?" the protagonist said mockingly. "Want to inspect it?" Frolosh reached for the pendant, but as her holy magic touched it, the artifact reacted violently. A red mist emanated from its skull-shaped eyes and mouth, accompanied by an eerie screech. The students erupted in whispers. "The son of a duke is using black magic," one exclaimed. "As expected of an artifact that costs as much as a mansion," another murmured. The system chimed in the protagonist's head, plus 2,000 points added to your balance. Reason: the fearless villain's entrance. The protagonist chuckled inwardly. 2,000 points? Mischief pays off. Isolate stormed into her office, followed by the protagonist. She slammed the door shut and glared at him. "How dare you bring an illegal black magic artifact into the academy?" she shouted. "You're overreacting," he replied nonchalantly. "It's just one item." Isolate's voice softened, tinged with disappointment. "What happened to you? You weren't like this before." A system window appeared before the protagonist, displaying Isolate's mental state. Isolate's mental state: angry, disappointed, worried, regretful, pity. "She's worried about me," the protagonist thought, but his expression remained cold. "I've just adapted to the ways of the world," he said. "Only a fool tries to live an honest life." Isolate sighed deeply. "Fine. Since this is your first offense, I'll let you off with a warning." The protagonist smirked. "That's more like it. Though I feel cheated. This pendant wasn't cheap." However, Isolate added sharply, "On one condition. You'll take me to the store where you bought it. I'm going to destroy everything in it." The protagonist blinked in surprise, then grinned. "Great plan. Let's go tomorrow. I need to pick something up anyway." Isolate pressed a hand to her temple in frustration. "We're not going shopping." Ignoring her, the protagonist waved as he left. "You're so fussy. See you tomorrow." As the door closed, Isolate sighed, staring into the distance. "Why have you changed so much?" Returning to his room, the protagonist found Kania playing with a stuffed black cat. "Welcome back, master," she said cheerfully. "I forgot you were here," he muttered, sighing. "Oh, this is a stuffed cat my sister gave me. Isn't it cute?" Turning away to hide his expression, he said, "Ridiculous. It's way too cute," he thought. "Enough of that. Just go to bed," he barked. "Yes, good night," she replied, lying down. Once Kania was sound asleep, the protagonist rose, checking her breathing. "I'll need to replenish her life force for tomorrow," he muttered. Unbeknownst to him, the stuffed cat watched silently, its eyes glowing faintly, recording everything. The black cat watched intently as the main character inspected the unconscious girl. Its eyes glowed faintly with a purple light, capturing and recording the entire scene. The main character, oblivious to the cat's presence, muttered, "You're asleep, aren't you?" He waved his hand in front of the girl's face to confirm her state. Suddenly, a voice, soft yet familiar, emanated from the cat. It was the little butler girl, speaking to herself through the feline. "The fact that Frey started vomiting blood so suddenly is suspicious. I kept an eye on him all day, and he didn't do anything out of the ordinary, but..." The scene shifted briefly to earlier that day. The little butler girl concentrated, dark mana swirling around her hand. With a faint pop, a small black cat materialized. It became clear that the cat was a magical creation linked directly to her. Smirking, she muttered, "He's definitely going to try something while I'm asleep. Just give up already. I'll catch you red-handed this time." Back in the present, the main character rolled up his sleeves and glanced at the sleeping girl. Completely unaware of the cat's hidden vigilance, he said, "Well, since she's out cold, I guess I'll get started." He carefully lifted her shirt slightly and began channeling his life force into her body. From the cat's perspective, however, the scene appeared far less innocent. The butler girl's voice broke out again in disbelief. "What is this bastard doing? Is he ruining his health staying up late just to do something like this? Ugh, trash. I'm going to kill him once I wake up. No, once I'm back in my body, I'll make sure to torture him thoroughly first." The cat continued observing as the main character's body began trembling slightly, his face contorting in pain. It hesitated. "Why is he shaking like that? He looks like he's suffering. What's he doing with his hand on my stomach?" Still, she dismissed the thought with suspicion. "No way someone like him is doing anything good. If I just wait, he'll show his true colors." Finally, the main character slumped back with a tired sigh. "Phew, that should be enough for today." The cat thought, "Wait, he's done already?" It watched warily as the main character stood up, shaking slightly, and began walking toward it. Panic set in. Did he notice me? A smile suddenly broke across the main character's face as he reached out and picked up the cat. His eyes lit up with joy. "Wow, this cat is so soft and so cute," he exclaimed, holding it gently in his hands. The cat froze, completely confused. "What is happening? Why is he cuddling me?" Without any warning, the main character carried the cat to his bed. "Let's play for a while," he said cheerfully. He began pressing on the cat's stomach, eliciting an involuntary meow with every touch. Each time, the cat grew more frustrated and flustered. All through the night, the room echoed with the sound of the cat meowing as the main character continued his playful antics. At one point, he mused to himself, "Maybe I should turn into a cat too. This is kind of fun." And so, the night was filled with the soft, repetitive sounds of the cat's helpless meowing. The main character woke up to a sudden noise. Rubbing his eyes, he turned to the little butler girl and asked, "What's wrong with you? Is it morning already?" She clutched her stomach and muttered, "My stomach hurts a little," before bolting out of the room. "Just go to the damn toilet already," he shouted after her. From outside, her faint voice replied, "Please don't mind me." The main character sighed, thinking, this whole situation is so annoying. Suddenly, a familiar system chime echoed in his mind. Ding! Plus 200 points. Reason: a misunderstanding. He blinked in confusion. What? How'd I get points? I haven't done anything yet this morning. Before he could process it, another chime sounded, and 2 panels appeared in front of him. New announcement. By accumulating enough false evil points, you have leveled up from beginner to novice. Unlocked. Additional store items now available. The main character stared in astonishment. "Oh," he muttered, excitement rising. He began scrolling through the system store, his mind racing. "There's so much more to buy now. I'll get this and that, and maybe that too." Another chime interrupted his shopping spree. Ding! New announcement. Main scenario quest. The attack on the commoner's stone rental. Objective: prevent the attack and capture the culprit. Reward: increase the awakening level of the hero's weapon. Failure penalty: small reduction in life force and lifespan. A main quest, he muttered. Then that means I need to get the item from the auction first. It's perfect since I promised to go with Sensei today anyway. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. The teacher had arrived. The main character called out to the little butler girl, "Go open the door." "Yes, young master," she replied obediently, bowing slightly as she greeted the teacher. "Good morning, Sensei." The teacher stepped into the room, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "Why are you here, Kania?" The little butler girl replied matter-of-factly, "I was given permission to share a room with the young master as his butler." The teacher froze, processing the words. Then, with an exasperated outburst, she yelled at the main character, "You're not supposed to share a room with the opposite sex. Are you out of your mind?" The main character smirked and shot back, as expected of a virgin. Before she could respond, he added, "You really should try to have your first time soon. If you don't, you might pass the marriageable age." The teacher's face turned beet red, and she stood frozen, as if she had just seen Medusa herself. Kania tried to calm the situation. "Sensei, I promise we haven't done anything inappropriate." Another chime echoed in the main character's mind. Ding! Plus 100 points. Reason: a harsh remark. He ignored the notification and walked closer to the teacher, smiling slyly. "Seriously, how long are you planning to stand here? Let's go already. Didn't you say you wanted to check out the back alleys?" Kania bowed politely as they left. "Please take care," she said, watching the two walk out the door. The teacher hesitated, glancing around. "Are you sure this is the right place?" The main character, annoyed, replied, "Just follow me and shut up. This is the right alley." They entered a dark, narrow passage where an eerie silence hung in the air. Suddenly, the teacher stopped, her expression twisting in frustration and anger. Why is this place like this?" The scene expanded before them, a bleak, heart-wrenching image. 3 emaciated children sat by the roadside, their ribs protruding from their malnourished frames. One of them appeared close to death, barely breathing. Nearby, 2 bloated nobles, as plump as pigs, were laughing and groping a young noblewoman, their arrogance as distasteful as the sight itself. The main character sighed. "I can't blame her. I feel the same way when I see this." He glanced at the teacher. Even though she knows about the Empire's corruption and injustice, I bet she never imagined seeing it like this up close. The teacher's voice turned cold, her anger palpable. "Hurry up and take me to the store. After I'm done there, I'm going to clean up this entire area. The main character gestured ahead. Relax. The store's right in front of us. The teacher blinked in surprise. Already? So this is the place. Her astonishment quickly faded as she drew her sword with determination, her eyes blazing with intent. Wait here. I'll finish this quickly. Watching her rush off, the main character sighed, scratching his head. She's always like this. Just then, a commotion drew his attention. Down the alley, two grown men were mercilessly beating three small boys. One of the boys cried out in desperation, "Save me! Stop resisting!" One of the men barked. The main character froze, watching in disbelief. The scene grew uglier as the men grabbed a young girl, roughly covering her mouth and tying her up. One of the men sneered, "The master will be pleased with a fine jewel like this." The main character's fists clenched, and his veins bulged in rage. "I came here to prepare for the main quest, but this..." He gritted his teeth, his pupils narrowing with fury as he stared at the men. "This is something I can't just overlook."